Today starts our month-long series on artists who inspire. Today is about a special woman half of you have never heard of. In 1925, Josephine Baker sailed for Paris. She was 19 years old. She became an instant star for her erotic dancing at a club in Paris called Folies Bergère. Here she is. Her success coincided with the Exposition des Arts Décoratifs in 1925, which gave birth to the term Art Deco, and also was part of a renewal of interest in non-Western forms of art, including African art. Born in June of 1906 in St. Louis, Missouri, her mother, an adopted woman by former enslaved people and Native American descent. In 1917, she was 11 years old. Her name was Josephine McDonald at the time. She witnessed racial violence in East St. Louis. In a speech many years later, she recalled what she had seen at age 11. She said, "I can still see myself standing on the west bank of the Mississippi, looking over at East St. Louis and watching the glow of the burning of Negro homes lighting the sky. We stood, children, huddled together in bewilderment, frightened to death with the screams of the families running across the bridge with nothing but what they had on their backs as their worldly belongings. So with this vision," she said, "I ran and I ran and I ran." By age 12, she dropped out of school. At age 13, she lived on the streets in the slums of St. Louis, sleeping in cardboard shelters and scavenging food and making a living with street corner dancing. She was married at age 13. The marriage lasted less than a year. She was married again at age 15. She joined a vaudeville troupe. She left her husband and went to New York City, where she quickly rose to the status of chorus dancer on Broadway, and then her troupe got a chance to go to France, where she bloomed. In Paris, she danced the Charleston, a dance with its roots in the Gullah Geechee low country dances of Africa and South Carolina that had moved up through Harlem to Broadway and with Josephine to France. Her version of this dance would show how a free and joyful and courageous person can embody something deeper of the spirit. Not only freed from discrimination that she knew in America, but suddenly freed to be a star, Josephine, by the age of 20, met thousands of people in Europe who knew her name, who came out to greet her at train stations when she arrived in cities in Europe. Through the exoticism of African movement and new styles of dance she brought to the stage, her erotic, free spirit shot her to stardom to become the first Black superstar female performer in the world. She led a career in dance and singing and film, and she won over the adoration of men and women alike. Why? I think because somehow she could harness the erotic power of her spirit through her body and movement, because somehow her joy in freedom of who she was had to have a place to come through to show the people love. This is the erotic that Audre Lorde speaks of and spoke of in the reading Beth wrote. Not pornography, which is a cheap form of arousal, but the erotic as a source of power and information. Information expressed through her body that she would not be held down or back because she was a Black woman in the world. Audre Lorde, so many years later, looking back at the foundation that Baker unleashed, said, "We have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings, but once recognized, those which do not enhance our future lose their power and can be altered. The fear of our desires keeps them suspect and indiscriminately powerful, for to suppress any truth is to give it strength beyond endurance." Lord said, the fear that we cannot grow beyond whatever distortions we may find within ourselves keeps us docile and loyal and obedient, externally defined, and leads us to accept so many facets of our oppression as women. Josephine Baker unleashed a power of yes to life, that is still trying to free itself from puritanical forces that want to stuff it back into boxes of banned books and poems and performers and people who express freedom of body and sexuality and love for who they are. We are experiencing this right now as Pride Month meets protest and conservatism and puritanism. We are experiencing the forces that try to silence that free feminine power with policies and policing of public art and human lives, that force that tries to suppress yes. And Baker never stopped. She matured. She leveraged her fame for the uses of freedom. When France declared war on Germany in response to the invasion of Poland, Baker was recruited by the Deuxième Bureau, the French military intelligence agency, as an honorable correspondent. She worked with the head of French counterintelligence in Paris. She socialized with Germans at embassies and nightclubs, charming them while secretly gathering information. Her cafe society fame enabled her to rub shoulders with high-ranking Japanese officials and Italian and Vichy bureaucrats and Nazi officers, and she reported back what she heard and learned. And when the Germans invaded France itself, Baker housed people who were working to help a free France, an effort to continue the freedom of people in Europe. She carried information for transmission to England about airfields and harbors and German troop concentrations in the west of France. This is the stuff of spy novels and TV series, notes written in invisible ink on Baker's sheet music, stuffed in costume boxes, passed to spies in perfume boxes. For her work in the resistance, she received the Cross of War Medal from the French government. And when she died in 1975, she was interred in the Pantheon in Paris, the first black woman and one of the very few foreign-born figures to be interred with France's most revered heroes. In the 1950s, back in the U.S., she refused to perform for segregated audiences. Her insistence on mixed audiences helped to integrate live entertainment shows in America, and she began to receive threatening calls from people who claimed to be the Ku Klux Klan. In 1963, she spoke at the March on Washington at the side of Martin Luther King Jr. Baker was the only official female speaker while wearing her French uniform, her Free France uniform, emblazoned with her Medal of the Legion of Honor. In her speech, one of the things that Baker said was, "I have walked into palaces of kings and queens and into houses of presidents and much more, but I could not walk into a hotel in America to get a cup of coffee, and that made me mad. And when I get mad," she said, "you know that I open my big mouth, and then look out, because when Josephine opens her mouth, they hear it all over the world," she said. Baker stood for so much, for the fame of black women, for freedom for those pressed down by governments and wars and prejudice and fear. And above all, for the power of the erotic to express yes and freedom within us. Whether she was consciously aware of leveraging the erotic or not, she got to change things because she got to press together her spirit and freedom without fear. The word erotic comes from the Greek word eros, the personification of love in all aspects, born of chaos and personifying creative power and harmony. The erotic is an assertion of a life force of the feminine, of that creative energy empowered. Again, Audre Lorde said, "We have attempted to separate the spiritual and the erotic, thereby reducing the spiritual to the world of flattened effect, a world of the ascetic who aspires to feel nothing. But nothing is farther from the truth, for the ascetic position is one of the highest fear." For the erotic is not a question only of what we do, it is a question of how acutely and how fully we can feel in doing. Remember, she said, we have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings. In touch with the erotic, we become less willing to accept powerlessness, or those supplied states of being which are not native to us, such as resignation and despair and self-effacement and depression and self-denial. Audre Lorde built this upon Josephine Baker's life and upon going further back into Dante and Plato and others. Eros was always the go-between spirit or dynamic known in the ancient world as daimon, whose embrace widens and deepens perception. Diotima taught Socrates that the arts of love can lead to the highest mysteries of sight, ultimately catching glimpses of what's good and beautiful and true. On the day of her funeral, more than 20,000 people lined the streets of Paris to witness the procession. And the French government honored her with a 21-gun salute, making Baker the first woman in history to receive French military honors. So what does a black woman from the streets of St. Louis, who danced and enchanted the world through the 20s, through the 60s, into the early 70s, have to say to us? What does she inspire in us? Have you heard it already? For me, she's saying, let your spirit be free. Feel the power of your inner life emerge that is calling you to wholeness and to joy that is unbound. It is saying that your suffering is not the tool to change. It is the ground from which you can spring if you can find a yes in you. I say, let us learn from feminism and womanist theology to unite heart and mind and body in a powerful expression of who we are, no matter who you are. And you're hearing this from a male body, white, cisgender, heterosexual, wearing a robe and a stole. And that's the beauty of this and this moment, where the eros and the logos, God and the erotic meet, is in the surprises of who speaks, where the truth emerges. From a girl who was homeless in St. Louis to being famed on the stages of Paris, to us today through philosophers and liberation poets. They say to us, let us feel the joy of life without shame, without allowing the forces of purity to ban books or teach us that love only comes in one form. We have a long heritage in this church of rejecting Puritanism for freedom. Today we are doing the same work. Let us allow the yes to invade our lives, to stand up for pride and freedom and for love. Let us live with the spirit of Josephine Baker today and always, which says life is good. There is an erotic spirit within that doesn't have anything to do with sexuality. It is the deep root of who we really are, how we feel our way through life. Let it come out. Let it not be confined. Let us not be told who we should be by forces of Puritan culture. And there is joy in life that is worth finding and unleashing. Let the Spirit sing, and let it dance, and let it laugh in you. To that I say, Amen.